History is written by the victors. But what happens when a victor simply vanishes? Imagine an empire so powerful it stood equal to the great pharaohs of Egypt, a superpower whose kings called themselves brother to Ramesses the Great. An empire that commanded legions of revolutionary war chariots and built cities of monumental stone. And then, in the space of a single lifetime, it was gone. Its capital was left to the wind and dust, its people scattered, and its very name was erased from human memory for 3,000 years. This is the story of the Hittites, the ghost empire that challenged Egypt and the chilling modern discovery that finally explains its sudden, catastrophic end. For millennia, the Hittites were nothing more than a whisper in the Old Testament, a footnote mentioning a tribe in the hills of Canaan. Historians of the 19th century saw no reason to think otherwise. Egypt's glory was carved into every stone along the Nile. The Hittites, it seemed, had left nothing but a name. But then, explorers in the heart of modern-day Turkey began finding ruins that fit no known pattern, colossal walls and gates guarded by stone lions, hinting at a forgotten power. The mystery deepened, a dissonance between the minor biblical reference and the monumental reality on the ground. The puzzle began to take shape in 1906. A German archaeologist, Hugo Winckler, began to dig at the largest of these sites, a place called Bogaskoi. What his spade uncovered would rewrite the story of the ancient world. He found a royal archive, tens of thousands of clay tablets, baked hard by the fire that had destroyed the palace that housed them. Many were written in Akkadian, the international language of the age, and their contents were a geopolitical bombshell. These were letters between the kings of this lost city and the most famous pharaohs of Egypt. They spoke of war, of trade, of royal marriages. They spoke as equals, and among them was one tablet that changed everything, a detailed peace treaty signed with Ramesses II. An identical copy of that very treaty was already known, carved in hieroglyphs on a temple wall at Karnak in Egypt. This was the legendary Treaty of Kadesh. The minor tribe was an empire. The ghost had a name, the Hittites, and this ruined city was their mighty capital, Hattusa. But most of the tablets were written in a language no one could read. The Hittites had been found, but they were still silent. The final key came not from a trench, but from the mind of a Czech scholar named Bedřich Hrozný during the First World War. Staring at a recurring line of text, he had an epiphany. He recognized a symbol for bread. The word next to it, ezatini, sounded like the old German word for to eat, and the word water was uncannily close to water. The sentence snapped into focus. Now, you will eat bread and drink water. It was more than a translation. It was a resurrection. Hrozný had discovered the oldest known Indo-European language in history, a voice that predated the earliest Greek by centuries. After 3,000 years of silence, the Hittites could finally tell their own story. And it was a story of conquest, innovation, and power. The Hittites rose from the rugged highlands of Anatolia, a kingdom forged in fire and political turmoil. Unlike the divine pharaohs of Egypt, early Hittite kings were often seen as first among equals, a dynamic that led to generations of assassinations and succession crises. Yet out of this crucible of conflict, a fearsome military power emerged. In 1595 BCE, they did the unthinkable, launching an audacious raid that sacked the great city of Babylon, sending shockwaves across the ancient world. The Hittites had arrived on the world stage. Their military might was built on a revolutionary weapon, the war chariot. While others had chariots, the Hittites perfected them. By moving the axle to the middle of the chassis, They created a heavier, more stable platform that could carry a three-man crew, a driver, a warrior, and a dedicated shield-bearer. This wasn't the light, skirmishing vehicle of the Egyptians. It was a Bronze Age assault tank, a shock weapon designed to smash into enemy lines with terrifying force. But here's what many historians got wrong for years. The source of their power was not, as is often claimed, a monopoly on iron weapons. In the late Bronze Age, iron was a precious, almost mystical substance, rarer than silver and sourced from meteorites, literally iron from heaven. It was used for ceremonial daggers and royal gifts, not for equipping armies. In fact, high-quality bronze was the superior metal for the battlefield. The true Iron Age would only begin after the Hittites' own world of complex bronze trade had collapsed. By the 13th century BCE, the Hittite Empire was at its zenith. Under powerful kings, they had expanded south, swallowing up territory and pushing against the northern frontier of the Egyptian Empire. A clash of these two superpowers was now inevitable. It would come on the plains of Syria, at a strategic city called Kadesh. It would be the largest chariot battle in recorded history, a maelstrom of dust, bronze, and blood involving nearly 6,000 war machines. The young, ambitious Pharaoh Ramesses II marched his army of 20,000 men north, confident of victory. But the Hittite king, Muwatalli II, was a master of strategy. As the Egyptians advanced, they captured two nomads who claimed the Hittite army was afraid and had retreated far to the north. It was a lie, a perfectly crafted piece of disinformation. The entire Hittite host, an even larger army drawn from across their empire, was hidden, waiting in ambush just behind the city of Kadesh. Blinded by arrogance, Ramesses fell for the trap completely. He ordered his lead division to race ahead, becoming dangerously separated from the rest of his army. It was the moment Muwatalli had been waiting for. As the 2nd Egyptian division marched in a long, exposed column, the Hittite trap was sprung. 2,500 heavy chariots exploded from their hiding place, thundering across the river and crashing into the unprepared Egyptian flank. The Egyptian division shattered. Panic ripped through the ranks as survivors fled toward Ramesses's camp. The pharaoh was caught completely by surprise, his camp overrun, his army in chaos. He was surrounded, facing total annihilation. The carefully laid plans of the Hittites had worked to perfection. The greatest power in the world was on the verge of being decapitated in a single, devastating blow. What happened next became the foundation of Ramesses's legend. On the walls of his great temples at Abu Simbel and Karnak, he tells a story of solitary divine heroism. The reliefs show the pharaoh, abandoned by his troops, praying to the god Amun, and then single-handedly charging the enemy, scattering 2,500 chariots like dust in the wind. It is one of the most magnificent stories ever carved in stone, and it is almost entirely a fabrication. The historical reality was far less glorious. Ramesses was saved not by a miracle, but by two crucial factors. First, the Hittite charioteers, believing victory was won, broke formation to plunder the rich Egyptian camp, losing their discipline at the critical moment. Second, and more decisively, a separate force of Egyptian reinforcements, the Nearin, arrived on the battlefield from the coast, appearing as if from nowhere and striking the Hittite rear. This allowed Ramesses and his personal guard to fight their way out of the trap. The battle ended not in a glorious Egyptian victory, but in a bloody stalemate. Ramesses failed completely in his objective. He could not take Kadesh and was forced to retreat to Egypt, leaving the region firmly in Hittite hands. Hittite records discovered in their ruined capital tell a very different story, one of a crushing defeat for the pharaoh. In private letters exchanged years later, the Hittite king even asked Ramesses why he kept portraying a battle he had so clearly lost as a great triumph. The Battle of Kadesh was a masterclass in ancient propaganda. A pharaoh, a living god, could not be seen to have been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. The sheer scale of Ramesses' carved narrative was a direct measure of his failure on the battlefield. He may have lost the war for Syria, but by controlling the story, he won the war for history's memory. And for a time, the two empires, exhausted by war, settled into an uneasy peace, formalized by the world's first great international treaty. The Hittites seemed invincible, but an invisible enemy was coming for them. Around 1200 BCE, the entire world of the Late Bronze Age came to a sudden, violent end. Great empires crumbled, trade routes ceased, and cities burned. The Hittites were at the heart of this collapse. For years, scholars blamed a perfect storm of invasions by the mysterious sea peoples, internal rebellions, and economic failure. But new science has revealed the trigger, the tipping point that likely set the catastrophe in motion, a devastating, unprecedented climate event. By studying the rings of ancient juniper trees from the Hittite heartland, scientists have created a precise climate timeline. The rings show a gradual drying trend, and then, between 1198 and 1196 BCE, something apocalyptic: 3 consecutive years of extreme drought. For a civilization built on grain, this was a death sentence. Food reserves vanished. Famine swept the land. The state, unable to feed its army or its people, simply disintegrated. The great capital, Hattusa, appears to have been largely abandoned before it was finally burned, a ghost town before it became a ruin. This catastrophic drought reframes the entire story of the collapse. The infamous sea peoples were likely not the cause, but a symptom. Desperate migrants and raiders, themselves uprooted by the same climate-driven famines that were starving the Hittites. A desperate letter from a vassal king on the coast pleads for help against enemy ships, writing that his own troops are far away and that the country is abandoned to itself. Help never came. Within a single generation, the great king of Hatti was gone, and the empire had vanished from the earth. But the ghost of the empire lived on. Refugees fled south, establishing smaller Neo-Hittite kingdoms that preserved their culture for a few more centuries. Their true legacy, however, is one of ideas. The Treaty of Kadesh, a testament to their diplomatic prowess, now hangs in replica at the United Nations as a symbol of peace. Their legal codes were remarkably humane, favoring restitution over retribution. The story of the Hittites is a powerful lesson, a reminder that even the mightiest empires can be brought down by forces they cannot control, and that history is never a settled story. It is a cycle of memory, loss, and rediscovery, with secrets still waiting silently to be found. If you found this journey into the lost world of the Hittites compelling, please subscribe to our channel and join us again as we uncover more stories from the past.